we've set this panel up actually to have a lot of discussion. People have been here in the past. Remember when we did it upstairs and it was a more intimate setting, and we had a lot of debate and discussion. So what I want you to be thinking about is start asking questions during this session. We've got a good 40 minutes set aside for it. We have a panel here who has handled a lot of different complex issues, and so we're prepared to really cover the waterfront. And if people do not ask questions, I'll call on people in the audience. So I think various people know who I might call on, so be prepared. I do want to, since Lucy's joined the panel, and people had seen previous presentations, Lucy, could you tell us what you're doing with Dirt for Dinner and
Sure.
give us some perspective?
So I have a couple of different roles in my life, and one of them obviously is up there as chairman of Waycross, which is a family office. But the main focus of why I'm here is that I have a blog with 3 other individuals, and we talk about food and agriculture. So the blog is called Dirt to Dinner, and what we're trying to do is educate the consumer on food choices.
So when I opened up the discussion today, I discussed System A and System B and our effort to collectively work on System C. Through all my career in terms of developing technology, I've always found that if you reduce the cost of good below the cost of bad, you don't need to incentivize people. And so a pressing issue in our mind as investors is something not unlike, we used to get into fights in our car. I'm a middle child. So we'd be driving somewhere, we'd get into a fight, and ultimately my father would get tired of the fight and say, we're not talking about this anymore, let's figure out what to do next. So that's the discussion I'd like to have today, and I want to make sure that people in the audience are sort of saying, well, you know, it was really neat what Nancy said, or it was really neat what Bruce said, but here are the practical challenges. And so that's what we want to try to drive on today. So we heard this morning, I think, that food and health are interconnected. Those that have been close to it have seen that for some time. The consumers are changing and their behaviors are changing. That the value chain is likely to get disrupted first and alter. We learned that we need to give a poop. And that there's a really fascinating set in terms of we're investors in Benson Hill and really focus on their deep understanding of things like photosynthesis and genetics, but that we're starting to get a better understanding of biome and its connectivity to disease, and things are changing fairly dramatically. So the science is evolving. I'm interested in terms of people on the panel, and any one of you can speak up or raise your hand, but in terms of what you foresee, what do you think is going to change first towards the idea of getting consumers to be more price-driven, and what's going to be the good below the cost of bad that you think will be the early signals that we see in the marketplace that consumers should be paying attention to and investors can see as a signal that the market is shifting?
I think I go back to the fact that the value chain is where the first disruption begins to occur. And so we were looking at some stats. If you take the traditional e-commerce, which actually enables direct-to-consumer delivery, one of the biggest cost factor that adds to the cost of all the products, at least on the fulfillment side, is the cost to pick the products and deliver them, right? And as you begin to see like robotics come into play and process automation systems come into play, you will begin to see some of that cost structure begin to diminish. So then there
of the supply chain
of
side
the supply chain side. And then as that begins to happen, right, like while driverless cars and other things might sound fancy now, but there is going to be a convergence of all these technologies between robotics, IoT, and automobiles. There's just going to be a convergence that will enable getting food to the person you need a lot more cheaper.
And are we seeing that yet? I mean, is Beyond Meat, or Impossible Burger, a step, getting the Burger King a step in that direction?
So yes, so we're in the very, very early stages of that. I don't think it's fully there. It's in the early stages of it. So at least we're beginning to disaggregate the chain. Then you can go and look at the cost structure of each item in the value chain, and then you're able to go after and have play to improvise that. So I think that's one place where it's going to help.
So Lucy, you have some perspective, I think, in terms of running large value chains at scale and trying to reduce costs. I mean, trying to
Right.
price-sensitive customers are
Right.
buying food, they got to feed their family. I mean, in terms of, we got a large scale, deliver a lot of food at a low cost, and there's going to be this disruption. What's your sense, if you were in charge of that kind of supply chain, what would you be looking for?
So if you think about the food supply chain all the way from dirt to dinner, and food really today is very cheap. In the United States, mostly, and mostly around the world, I mean, food is affordable and food is cheap. Unfortunately, the good food and the food that has more of a nutritional value, let's take away fruits and vegetables, for instance, but is more expensive. So Whole Foods, you can go buy hemp seeds at Whole Foods, where you're not going to buy hemp seeds at Walmart or the dollar store. And so how to bring the cheaper food, the healthy, cheaper food to the economically, or the people who can't afford it. And so it's really changing their paradigm, and that is where they're still going to eat Oreos, and they're still going to eat Hostess Twinkies, or whatever, that whole list of things. They're still going to eat ice cream, and we can talk about why in a minute. But what we have to do is change out the sugar. So that's the first component, and sugar innately is just more expensive than alternative sweeteners. So I think stevia is a great choice, or tagatose.
So just
here.
buy the thing you were buying before, but we're going to change out the gears
We're going
and
to change
sides.
out the ingredient, but those ingredients are mostly more expensive. And so then that's going to make your food, so no one's going to buy it. So that's where the price point has to come down, is on the ingredients to make the Oreo cookies, instead of that white, make that white stuff, put more omega-3 in the white stuff, biofortify an Oreo cookie, because people are still going to eat it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm saying.
Bill,
is
dive in here.
I've been in this battle for quite a few years.
You don't want to
now.
biofortify an Oreo cookie?
No, I wouldn't. That would be fantastic. But the issue that you run into is, yes, sugar is dirt cheap, right?
Yeah.
So I, as a technology company, as a food technology, person, go in and have had discussions at very high levels at a lot of the global food and beverage CPG companies, and one. The R&D might get excited about it, and then the brand manager or the owner might, you have to convince them that, that there's something of value there, but more and more as kind of traditional food brands are dying, that's a little bit easier conversation. But then you go talk to the procurement people, supply chain, and if you can't get the cost right, then they're not going to adopt your technology.
Yeah.
So that is a true dynamic.
The cost, taste, everything.
Absolutely.
The nutritional profile, the taste profile.
Absolutely. And yet, in the meantime, the other dynamic is that we know over the last few years, like 17 or perhaps 19 now of the leading CEOs for the leading food and beverage companies have changed hands because there is this zeroing out of the growth rate in the food industry. So, you see those signs, but then you have the actual conversations, and how do you get adoption? And is it a matter of just dropping price? You can, with scale, you can get some cost benefits, obviously, but, when do we start valuing actual explicit ingredients that have a value add in terms of health and that are actually curing the bigger $500 million to $1 trillion problem?
Yeah, but can I add just one more thing to that? So let's just think about Gatorade. To make a bottle of Gatorade, it costs like 5 cents, maybe 3 cents for Pepsi, but then they sell it for I don't know what it gets, maybe let's say $1.39. So that margin is huge. Well, then you add in, you swap out the sugar component or the high fructose corn syrup with stevia and something that's healthier, then all of a sudden your margin gets diminished. And then
You pick up all that brand power and everything else, because that costs.
Well, the cost, but you have the taste differential, so you have to make sure that the Gatorade tastes exactly like, the new Gatorade tastes exactly like the old Gatorade. And then you have your margin change, but then you also have quarterly earnings that you need to go to. So
Right.
there's so the key is to get the consumer to drive the desire for alternative sweeteners. And I'm not saying Splenda, or those. They're not necessarily better for you, but they're better than sugar and high fructose corn syrup.
Well, so we always talk about early adopter customers as people that sort of lead the way.
Right.
Early adopter customer is is often willing to pay more, and they're referenceable, meaning that somebody pays attention to them when they say it. So something that you've impressed on me is, okay, we know what the thing is, and we want to get the system C, but we got to make some money right now. So let's go find the people that want to be 6-year-olds and play the violin. So, and to some degree, we've sort of done that, but we've never made the transition to the next step. So you're going down this path. What is your thinking in terms of how to draw out that early adopter customer and trigger the mass market?
I think if you look at evidence of successes in the past, disruption can come as you begin to diversify. And the more diverse the customer becomes, the more diverse agriculture gets rewarded. And there's a good example. The cheese industry was completely disrupted about 20, 30 years ago by health. Because the weightlifting athlete who wanted to get bigger wanted, in essence, to be able to lift more weight. But today, the weightlifter in a Gold's Gym is huge compared to the weightlifter in Arnold Schwarzenegger's day.
Yeah.
They lift less weight less often. Why? It's because if you nourish, in essence, a weightlifter within 20 minutes of lifting weight with a high branched chain amino acid protein source, they actually build muscle faster. The dairy industry was making cheese, and they were throwing out a high branched chain amino acid protein source, whey. So now they capture waste, it's cheap. They deliver it to a customer that can really sense, in fact, measure the benefit. Disrupted weightlifting, less weight, and disrupted the cheese industry. And now actually most cheese manufacturers, their profit margin is in the way. So I think that the way it's going to work is not a big value for everyone. It'll begin to segment.
Yes.
And one after another, individual customer segments will begin to appreciate, well, it's doing this for me. Well, can it do that for me? And that diversity, I think, is the best thing for agriculture. Because now instead of everyone...
Diversity of customers with sort of different kinds of requirements.
Right.
Breaking up the value chain.
Right.
So if anybody was here last year, we had Mangalista pig served up, and it was brought to us by a guy named Chris Anderson. So Chris Anderson in the 80s was part of Milken's iBanking team. And if you've ever had a chance to meet with Chris, it's like meeting with Yoda in terms of his perspective. He told me something that I wrote about, which was Milken in 1982 issued $1 billion of junk bonds to fund MCI's marketing. Think about it. So up until that point, we had 10 cents a minute, wireline, copper line. That's the only thing you could buy. And the thing that Chris told me is Milken did that because he didn't understand what the real demand was for telecom services. He didn't know whether people wanted to pay 6 cents a minute or whether they were willing to pay 20 cents a minute a night to have a high quality. Didn't know. So, I mean, one, if you think about it, $1 billion to uncover latent demand. So this has bothered me for a while because I've been trying to think. We've got your weightlifters. We've got moms who want healthier babies. We've got people who want to play violins. We've got disrupted value chain. And then on the other side, we have, and we didn't really dig in this deep, but we have people in the ingredients companies who are trying to figure out, oh, this is really cool, all this stuff that you guys are developing it, but I have no idea how to make sugar taste like, new sugar tastes like old sugar. I don't even really know what that means. It's not like I can stick it in a computer and make it taste the same. There's actually people that taste it, and it takes years to figure out. So, a lot of information there. What, for investors in the room or entrepreneurs, did whey become a big thing for everybody? And what's that transition? How do we know that should we go out and touch a whole bunch of different customers and just hope that the chaos leads to new markets? Or is there something else we need to do in that space to trigger System C? Everybody's staring at me.
No, I think I think the hyper segmentation of consumer base needs to continue to happen. what I mean by that is the weightlifter example, the mom example, the guy training for, or the gal training for triathlon, right? That hyper-segmentation needs to continue to happen. And we're in very, very early stages of that hyper-segmentation, but you're seeing more and more. So every time you see a new food product come into space, they're picking their segment and going after it. The hyper-segmentation is one of the first things that needs to happen, which is good. The second thing, which I've been reading
So
on...
I'll give an example that I may have seen. So I ran into a millennial who doesn't care about GMO,
Right.
but she said, I'm not eating avocados any longer because they're not fair trade and they use 2 ounces
go.
of water. So is that what you mean?
It's a hyper-segment,
Okay.
right?
Yes, I think so.
It is a segment, right? It is a segment because, again, like, I have my value system of what I choose to eat, right? You have your value system of what you choose to eat. And I think one of the presentations spoke about how you grew up, or your value system actually begins to develop what you begin to cherish and eat. Like, I grew up not having food. So to me, having food is the first step, right? And then comes the next step of, is this healthy? Is this unhealthy? Like, if there's no food to eat, there's no discussion of healthy or unhealthy. So there is a fundamental system that begins to change, and then you begin to diversify into, I like brown rice versus white rice. Then you begin to go into a GMO versus non-GMO. So that's like the first big thing that needs to happen. The second thing is, and I think I'm still reading a lot about it and trying to understand, is the cottage food laws that we
The what?
The cottage food law that we have. If you think about why Uber became extremely powerful, is again, it's a different way of disaggregating the entire value chain. Today, the value chain is food grows, goes to a manufacturer, the manufacturer then does something with it, it then goes to another, then it goes to the retail store, then it comes to your house, right? But what Uber did was, anybody can be riding a taxi, right? I think about cottage food laws. Due to various considerations, there is restrictions in the United States on who can cook and deliver food. Like, if you're a neighbor, you can't really offer that service to someone else,
Yeah.
right? There's a restriction on that. But imagine if every household can cook and offer within certain restrictions, right? Because obviously we need to take care of mass-scale disease breakouts and things like that. I think you're now beginning to fundamentally change the entire thing. So now you build systems to connect the hyper-segmented consumer base to the hyper-segmented demand base.
So, and how do you expose that? I mean, I imagine when I'm on Amazon and I'm buying a hard drive, it will say 2.5 inch, 3 inch. It gives
Yeah.
me all this information that somewhere down the road I'm going to have that same experience. But where I can say, I want fair trade, I want no water, I want avocados with big seeds or small seeds or whatever.
Right.
Is that, how do we, the part I don't understand yet is how, is it could be, is it, do we have, leave Amazon to do that? Do they own that customer? How are you going to do that on Heinz?
Right. And so Meal Hero, like, is one of our first humble start at it, right? The one of the big challenges in the industry is we haven't yet disaggregated the demand and supply. It's getting there, right? Like, something like a Facebook or an Instagram is beginning to let someone who wants to run connect with the people who actually know
Yeah.
about running and make the discussion happen. Now, if you add commerce on top of that, that's fantastic, right? Just beginning to happen. Now, when you talk about food, the blockchain as a technology, let's take that for example, right? We are just beginning to connect every single ingredient that is ever produced into some sort of a registry from its origin to the delivery. We're just in the initial stages of discussion. So think about a future 5, 6, 7 years from now, when you have all of the food you need available for people to look at the data, all of the research you're doing in terms of biomes and things like that.
I interrupt here. So I got the connectivity, but for the entrepreneurs in the room and the investors, how do we get to see that intersection come together in practice? What's going to be the first sign in the marketplace that we're seeing that evolve and we can build on it?
It's exactly what you described. I'm able to go into a place and say, here are my specific requirements, and I have my food ready.
Can I add something to this, though? I mean,
Yeah.
so I understand what you're saying about, I think the food itself can be segmented, you know,
Right.
whether you like brown rice or white rice or, you know, whatever your preferences are. But how that food is made has to be the same. So not the same in the.
To get the
but
scale.
To get the scale and to really to feed the world. Remember, we've got 9 billion people to feed. That's a lot of people. And so in order to do that and save the environment and keep it on existing land, you need certain technologies that are going to grow the brown rice and the white rice and the wheat and everything all the same. So you need sustainability. You need
Yeah.
to make sure that you have, I like GMOs, so we can talk about that later, but you need technology. You need data on the farm. You need water sensors. So the whole farm production system has to be, you know, level playing field there, or has to be innovative. Then you have the processing capability. So you still need to process all this food and turn it into something. And then you have the consumer, and then it can spread out into the different types of food. But there has to be sustainability standards to really grow enough food and to grow food in scale and to meet the needs of the people who are, let's say you're an environmentalist and you want to eat food that's fair trade. Well, great, but if right now there's so many different standards for sustainability, even for chocolate, there's fair trade, there's OOTS, and there's, you know, 4 different ways. But if it's all standardized, then you can meet the needs of the consumer who wants to be sustainable, and then you're also meeting the needs of the environment.
Well,
But there
so-
has to be scale. You just can't have a bunch of different producers. You can't have 1,000 different producers making the same product.
At scale.
At scale. It
So
just doesn't work that way.
if you're running one of these large corporations and you're trying to figure it out, I mean, just think, you know, IBM building mainframes and the PCs coming along. There must have been some point of time where they saw enough consumer shift where they said, the game is on in a different direction.
Right.
And this is hard, but we're going to figure out how to do that.
So the game is on, right? I'd say the large food processors, most, as I can think of 2 of them, are switching out of, or looking very hard and trying to balance out their earnings from sugar and high fructose corn syrup over to alternative sweeteners.
So is that where we're going to see the first, I mean, is
Yeah, I mean,
Pepsi
that's-
a label
That is the
everything that
holy
says?
grail. The holy grail is for Pepsi and for Coke and for everyone, is to have a non-sugar Gatorade that still costs 5 cents.
And then
that's-
will that sort of,
But-
is that like the straw that breaks the camel back and say, it'll take 10 years or whatever from there, but is that the sort of, we'll look back and say, you know, Pepsi puts on their thing, diabetes is caused by sugar, we're not using sugar anymore.
No, and so Ed Rogers is here, I'll put a plug in for Bonamos. He's making tagatose. It's a fiber, and it's a rare sugar that's actually good for you. It has a probiotic in it, so it increases your gut bacteria. So how great is that?
It
I mean,
all
what if
feels good.
Gatorade had tagatose in it instead of sugar?
So
I'm just picking on Gatorade, I mean, I'm not.
But I move forward a little bit here. There's value in verticalization sometimes. We've seen this with Beyond Meats. So I might upset somebody here. Somebody mispriced Beyond Meats. 165% up. So the other iBankers, you've got an opportunity to step in here for the next one. But I sense that there was some misunderstanding in the bankers about value. And now you're working in many ways in the back end of saying, look, I understand how the science is going to be here. And as an investor, I say, hey, I want to see some verticalization. I want to see an Impossible Burger come out or something, to just sort of see if I can trigger consumer demand. In terms of the work you're doing, which is fantastic, what's your sense of sort of that first platform opportunity where you can start telling people, look, we understand how this stuff comes together a lot better than you realize, and we want to make a disruption here.
Yeah, I think you're totally right in your opening that it all, and as been echoed here, it all revolves around price. I would make the argument that what we've done is, solely optimized on price at the cost of a lot to society. So the first fundamental thing that's going to have to happen is that there has to be a realization that or just a revaluing or repricing of food. And I don't know, it might sound crazy, you all are experts in this more so than me, but I can tell you that, what you say is true. I've been involved in scaling a product, and I come from San Francisco, Silicon Valley. investors there are like, move fast and break things. And like, if you do that, one, you might kill someone,
Yes.
with food. Two, you're going to burn a ton of cash, and that puts you in no position. And it's really hard making a physical product. It's not like you can put something on your website and tell people to click and download, and then when there's a bug, you get a report and you patch it. It's a hard problem. So scale, obviously, and it gives you a ton of economic value if you can scale correctly. And the operational excellence that it requires, the level of execution is so high that with high value ingredients or alternative ingredients or however people want to think about them, there's going to be a real challenge in knowing some of these companies you're talking about. I know the pricing challenges they face as well. But
You mean like Impossible Burger?
yeah,
Beyond
right,
Meat?
exactly. We're all living the same thing kind of simultaneously. So I think what investors can do is one, is to invest in these challenger brands like the Impossible, like Beyond, that are making these newer versions of food available to the public, because the public is now starting to vote with their dollars, right? And
So like Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat, there's, I think, and someone here probably knows better, there's a lot of, bouncing back and forth around yellow pea versus other proteins
Right,
and
right.
getting the taste profile right.
Right.
And the food science. Is this all going to be sort of is the real money and the real disruption first going to show up a bit deep in that sort of food science kind of arena and try to work through that before it really shows up at scale?
I think what has happened in the first generation is that, just like any big food company did, they look to kind of the supply list, the catalog, and see what can we make out of it. Yellow pea was around, so you try that. Soy was around, so you try that. Impossible did something new in actually discovering and scaling a new ingredient to add to their product that lends to its organoleptic properties and the consumer experience, but there's a cost to that. And so over time, hopefully they'll be able to get to a point where that becomes scalable, and it's an interesting experiment that's being run. But I think with the adoption that you see with the Impossible Burger, you're already seeing that there is a market out there for that, and for that, that becomes a threat to the big food companies, and that will get the big food companies to move, in my opinion.
I'm sorry, say that again. What's going to be the threat?
That they're losing market share or to a challenger brand.
And are we sort of seeing that with
Because
I
they're
don't,
investing. They're investing in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And then you
like
saw-
the meat companies, you're
Did you-
investing in,
Yeah.
cattle, and then investing
Yes.
in
Yeah.
cell-based meat,
Mm-hmm.
or.
So
Beyond Meat.
one of the things we see, and we get a lot of inside information as VCs, we're seeing that the CPG companies and the food companies are rotating through management.
Right.
We're seeing that they're bidding up ingredients into insanity. I mean, we've walked away from deals that we like because they're just throwing money in at things that marginally look like they might answer shareholders' question about, hey, we're going to do something new about ingredients. So we're in this goofy phase and we're a little confused about what's going to happen next. I mean, do you have a sense as to, in that noise, guidance to us and where to place our bet?
I think, so just from experience, I would say that the replacement type approaches, replacement type technologies are going to be.
Replacement for sugar, replacement for
Yeah,
protein.
are going to be, and I think they're going to be fundamentally challenged in terms of you have to deal with the supply chain people that tells you just how much they're paying for sugar. But if you can add a real health benefit and actually tell a story around it and have consumers understand it, then what you have is a truly high value ingredient. And perhaps then that is something that the big food companies are probably likely will start out with the challenger brand, will produce it, get market share, be a threat,
So
and
is
then
that,
get
is that
snapped up.
Bruce's, I'm gonna let Bruce
Yeah.
say he's anxious here, but does that mean he's gonna be first chair violinist first, and then he's gonna say it's because I ate
I would not bet
my
against
specialty?
them.
Yeah. Sorry, so I like your idea, the Millikan moment. What's the Millikan moment for this? And to me, it's the shift from disease to health. And what investment would really change is investment in health assessment. Right now, we don't have, in essence, health assessment. We have diagnostics of disease. And of course, the food is trying to go for claims. I mean, to me, Cheerios cures heart disease is right there. That's a problem.
Yeah.
You'd have multiple benefits. As soon as you started providing people information about their health and able to measure it, then then the entire claim landscape would change. Now you're actually delivering health. Secondly, I don't care how many mathematicians you throw with their AI at health, if all the data they have is disease, that's all you'll ever get. So you start measuring health, and AI can go after health. And then finally, you get expectations in the consumer. And they start to imagine, oh, I could take control of my health. Give that to Generation Y.
So, but how's that could be delivered? I mean, how do people go, here's one way I've thought about it. You know, when I look at that held by public, it's going up. When we think about GMO versus CRISPR, millennials are seeing their parents and grandparents saved by CRISPR, so they're not going to get hung up on this GMO thing. And then they're all tech, especially Gen Z. So we talked WPP Gen Z. So Gen Z's like, I have to wait 7 years for the FDA to go through a phase 3 trial? Are you nuts?
Yeah.
So that what I've sort of seen is there's this pressure around, we have to socialize some of the decision making about how to do this, but there's a complete indifference to the old regulatory models. I mean, are you seeing any kind of where they just, a millennial or Gen Zer can't even conceive of it taking 7 years to go through a phase 3 trial? It's just, they're like, what do you mean? I can just do this download on my iPhone. How come I can't edit my own genes?
Yeah.
I mean, are you seeing any of this?
So I think where the consumer conversation now is, I know we talked about price as a driver for consumer behavior or consumer purchasing, but fear is the other driver. It's a huge fear. So everyone's scared about getting cancer and getting all these different diseases. So they are going to non-GMO, or they are going to, any all natural or organic. And so everyone's, so where the conversation needs to shift, instead of making people scared of their food, make people think, okay, I'm going to eat this because it's healthy and it's good for me. And that's where the conversation is
And so
shifting. And that's where the ingredients are going to come forward. Oh, you eat this and you'll be able to play the violin at, age 60 or whatever.
Are your kids are your kids get pressure you into do that, or they get pressure the adults into changing, or is
Yes,
they
I
just
think
get
the next
changed the behavior?
generation is pressuring us into making sure that we have healthy, sustainable food. I definitely see it. I see yes, I do. And not only do they want to eat, they want to work at a company that provides healthy,
Value
sustainable
system,
food. You want to work at a company that you feel good about what they're creating and what they're doing and making the world a better place, and they have a higher purpose. So that's where the conversation is shifting.
I want to open this up for questions. I thought we would get going on some questions earlier, but I don't know, raise the lights a little bit. I want you to challenge us here a little bit.
We need our sunglasses up here.
Oh, boy,
I can't see anything out there, so someone has to do this for me.
that table right there.
And just to double check, we've got 2 minutes more on the clock, or we've got 15?
No, you got 12.
I had 12 minutes, okay.
All right, thank you. I'm actually been sitting here wiggling to ask this
Wiggling?
question about pretty much everybody that's been speaking so far. I've heard it said a lot about the cheap food model and how we need to create a new, nutritionally based food model that is also cheap. But I'm curious, especially listening this morning to the profiles of Gen X, Y, and Z, how do we take advantage of these new mindsets to change the mindset about the cheap food model and see the value in food and take advantage of that to invest in food rather than whatever else we're spending our money on. I mean, we find money for a $700 iPhone. We find money even in these low income environments to buy an expensive car, lease an expensive car, do whatever you have to do to have these expensive things while assuming our food should be cheap. Food should not be cheap. If we're saying that it's, this is what our health is based on. So how do we change that mindset of these generations to see the value in food and invest in it and do whatever you have to do to get good food?
You want to go with that one, or I think you know the answer to this.
Well, actually, I agree with that perspective. I think the agricultural enterprise is struggling because there's so little value creation. So the poorest people in every sector of the world are the poor farmers, even in this country. So driving value propositions into agriculture is what we need to do. And if you can't afford it, then that's the real issue. Subsidized people, not sugar, would be my.
I think Kevin Van Trump's in the room. I'm going to speak for you here, and I want to modify and geek out on economics here. So, to restate System C, its value, I said cheap, but affordable, and affordable, going back to Chris Anderson, is understanding people's reservation price. What are they willing to pay to get good health? And I think Kevin is the one who told me 3 years ago when we met, the Fed was concerned that millennials were going to change their pocketbook towards organic and not buy homes and not buy cars. Now, Uber has made it so you don't have to buy a car anymore.
Right.
So we got more disposable income. And I don't know, what's your background? Who asked that question? Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm a grower, so.
You're a grower?
Yeah, well,
What does that mean? What do you grow?
organic fruits and vegetables.
Cool. So the question I sort of intrigued about is how do we get the connectivity? If I don't eat right, I'm going to have diabetes 60 years from now. Okay, so there's a little bit of, I don't know what that's called in economics, but that's a long time away.
Yeah.
How do we draw that back in? Are you seeing any, so how do you, on your formulation, how
Right.
do you get them to think about the total cost to get into that sort of value position?
See, the way I look at it is I go back a little bit to what you said in your talk about this being more of a knowledge economy, right? One of the things that I think we all need to do better is educate people on an ongoing basis of what it means to eat healthy and why you should eat. Like, that's fundamental, that needs to happen. The second aspect of what also needs to happen is meet people where they are, right? And I have a colleague who always says this: people want to eat the same food they eat, but they want to eat it healthier. So nobody's going to give away that pizza, to your point, because the pizza is unhealthy or something is wrong with it.
But they might if they want to go play the violin.
Well, depends. Again, so you have to meet the people where they are. So meet with their motivation. So this becomes more of a psychology play of getting people to understand and change the behavior, and then support it with every other thing that surrounds that behavior, right? And I think it's a much longer putt, but I think the easiest place to start is meet people where they are and understand their motivations and figure out how you can create the knowledge that helps them make the right choices along the way. That's how I view the world, at least.
So can I ask the audience a question?
Maybe, if your earphone doesn't fall off.
How many in the audience, every single day, in order to enhance your health and prevent Alzheimer's and heart disease and cancer, how many of you eat the combination of 3 to 5 servings of fruits a day plus 5 to 7 servings of vegetables a day? Every single day. Okay, well, there's not a lot.
Not a lot.
And that's all
Lucy's got a great article on this on her website.
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties, but that's all you have to do to eat well. But how many people do that? I have 3 boys in their 20s. I'm telling you, that doesn't happen. And no matter how much I tell them, so I think, to your point, meet people where they are. So, even an overall healthy diet is really the key to health, but people aren't going to do it. And so how do you incorporate the fruits and the vegetables and the nutrition of those into foods that are easy and convenient? And, that's just the reality of it all.
I'm not sure we've answered your question fully, but let's try another one. Somebody got the microphone again? Whoever's got the microphone, ask the question, because I can't see you depict you.
No, we need our sunglasses up here.
It's like I feel like I'm in style like
Can you hear me?
13 or something here.
Yeah.
All right, this is Travis, tractor.
Travis.
Guy. Yeah, Carter, I knew that you were looking at me. Even
I don't know where you are, but go ahead.
So,
And you and Bruce need to get together, because I
Totally.
think you two together are going to change the world.
I love what you guys are doing. Yeah, you guys are changing the food world on a big level. I've got some bullets for you guys.
Okay.
So I want to go with Bruce first.
You got 5 minutes, you gotta let us give
Okay,
some
I'm gonna
time to
go
answer,
quick.
so.
Bruce, digestion. Like obviously, my mom didn't nurse me. She didn't get nursed. We have all these different probiotics that we take now to try to get back on track because we live in a world where we drink water that's full of chemicals and we have food that has preservatives in it that maybe make our gut health not as good. How can that affect the amount of food that we actually eat? Do we eat more food than we need? And then going into kind of the Ayurvedic dynamic, like how do we do satiety where we don't have to eat as much food? That's another bullet. And then botanicals. Which botanicals make the most sense that we should be eating that most people aren't? And I'll leave it at that and let you guys run with it.
Sure.
Okay, digestion, actually milk guides us there. We were concerned that premature babies couldn't digest human milk, so we tested, and lo and behold, they were digesting it beautifully. But then we analyzed, and actually the babies couldn't digest it. Milk has enzymes that activate in the baby and help digest. So now we know. Make sure that premature babies get raw milk that has the enzymes. But who else can digest? The elderly. The elderly are desperate to save their muscle. They, in essence, hyper-ingest protein. Plant proteins are very difficult to digest. They don't get the amino acids. In essence, the proteins continue on and fuel proteobacteria in their gut. Enzymes that will help digest proteins will increase the available proteins. You won't have gluten intolerance, and you can dramatically improve plants as the ability to deliver protein to the population. Digestibility is really key, and you can actually do it without a massive change in commodity agriculture.
Any other questions?
Oh, I have a question over here on the right side.
I have no idea where you are. Go ahead, speak up.
So a lot of this conversation was centered around diversification of the food system and I guess personalization of nutrition. I'm curious to hear a little bit on the opposite side of that coin. If you see a role in, for example, policy creating fewer options in some cases or mandating supplementation or I guess when do we see as a society the value in trying to prevent some of these negative health outcomes and creating more restrictions? Do you see any role for that in the future food system?
I actually do, and actually in preparation for this, I was doing a lot of thoughts on what needs to change. And I'll give you some examples that I think gets you to the bottom of what needs to change in the policy. How many of you have actually paid for a freshly squeezed orange juice and have had it? And how many of you remember paying the price for it? What was the average price? $5 to $7. And if you picked up something in the store, how much was it? $1.99, $2, right? Like the ready-made juice. So I think when you disaggregate that and see what adds to the cost, there's a lot of things, right? From the human cost that goes into it, the infrastructure cost that goes into it, and there needs to be a policy around that, right? Like how do we incentivize something like a fresh juice if it was available at $2 or $3 at the same price point of processed juice? Chances are you're like, so there's just a policy play there. That's on almost like my buying side of it, right? Then let's take the incentivization side of it. There are two ways to look at it. I think insurance companies are now beginning to incentivize the right behaviors in terms of in certain areas, right? But how many of you have checked if your insurance policy actually supports you calling your dietitian or a nutritionist? How many of you have even taken time to check if you can talk to somebody about it, right? Did they support? So there you go. So if food is one of the most important things, right, and then the insurance agency doesn't support you or doesn't reimburse you for calling on a dietitian or a nutritionist, but they are somehow part of the system, of the healthcare system, all of a sudden you have disincentivized that phone call. So now think about those two examples where policy can play an important role in helping elevate. One, where you're beginning to look at the cost structure of what it takes. Then you get into other things like minimum wage law and things like that that also need to elevate. So the entire system has to strive to come to certain type of balance. The balance is never going to happen. That's just the truth. But it has to work its way to a balance where all of these things come together. And that's how I see is the role of policy, frankly, in how it elevates the discussion across.
I have a couple points on that real quick. I think,
Just double check. Joe, remind me, how much more time do we have?
We're right, we have 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, I was a little confused. Okay, we're going to keep going.
yeah,
Go ahead.
30 seconds.
We're going to like
answer.
earn some rights back from
Yeah.
Joe here.
In terms of policy, I think one interesting experiment being run is down in South America right now. I don't know if you saw the news, but they're actually black labeling some sugary, added sugar food products. So much like the tobacco warning label on that happened here in the States, they're actually doing that in South America because the cost of healthcare is getting so extreme that the government's trying to disincentivize people from eating bad. So that's one example of policy that is something that could happen here. Everyone's saying that sugar is the next tobacco. The second thing is that an interesting model is Japan. Japan, if you actually put in as a ingredient technology company, put in the effort to find ingredients that are healthful and you can make scientifically backed claims for, you're allowed to put that on the packaging or advertise that. Here, the FDA is really focused on food safety, most predominantly and historically, and that's noble, but the ability to do that, make those types of claims here, there's just no avenue for that. And because of that, this type of work that we do, or the type of work you would do to develop these high-value ingredients is expensive, so it disincentivizes that effort, because you cannot reclaim that value by educating consumers.
So do you think that you're going to be able to take your technology to the point that you can put more foundational evidence
Yes.
on those
Yeah, absolutely.
claims?
That's part of our.
And that might be an
for us.
early label, just the ability to label it? Would a food
Yeah,
company
so,
come?
so for us, we can make certain health claims, but in the US, we're really, really restricted to just kind of structure function type claims, like improves, digestion is a good one. But if you go to a place like Japan, and that might be a good business model for some of these companies to go to places where you can make those powerful
Yeah.
statements and then have it kind of come back to the US.
I mean, is that the early adopter market? We think about early adopter market.
Yeah.
We're going to hit different parts of the group here, but just go to Japan or go to.
And yeah, exactly. So that is a strategy.
Somewhere. Whoever's got the mic, speak up.
I want to build on that the Chilean black labeling. There's a couple others. I'm trying to look at outcomes and who's actually been able to get to successful outcomes. And so what I want to ask the panel is, you have other examples like that. So for instance, if you go back, Jamie Oliver went and fat shamed Huntington, West Virginia, because it was the fattest community in the United States. If you actually look, after he left, the obesity rate there has dropped from 45% to 32%, a 9% drop, all after he left. If you look at the Netherlands, they outlawed sugary drinks in schools and no fast food advertising in schools, and child obesity rates have dropped 12% in 7 years. Do you have other case studies where you've seen successful outcomes, where we've modified behaviors?
So in Australia, the Aborigines, they were becoming obese because they had access to like a mini mart or access to the grocery store, and they were fed, a Western diet. And then the government stepped in and said, all right, we're going to subsidize more fruits and more vegetables, and we're going to take away the sodas and the crackers and the cookies. And their obesity rate dropped, and their heart disease rate dropped, cancer rates dropped. And then, unfortunately, the government stopped funding this program. And then, so the grocery store went back, filled up with all the unhealthy foods, and then came back up. But then in Australia, there's the Australian Aborigine example, which is, to your point.
Has anybody got an evidence of affordable and good, where it didn't require subsidy? Anybody seen anything like that?
Well, McDonald's has its salad.
Oh, Joe's waving his hand. Okay, so here's the thing. We have set up this conference to try to maximize networking. We've kept it small. You may not think it's small, but we've kept it small. and encourage some really great people to show up. We've got time today through more of this event. Tonight, we've got the Innovation Showcase. One of the reasons we work here at the Peabody is because the lobby is a fantastic place. I think a few of us have closed the bar down at 2, which is rare. But that was mostly because of discussion. So what I really encourage all of you to do, and I need the feedback on this, is we have seen over the last 3 years a lot of change occur in thinking. And we intend to keep doing this conference in a way to keep driving thinking and to find unique ideas from different people. So go to Innovation Showcase later, talk to these people, pull them aside, sit down. If you're free up, just go sit in the lobby tonight, and more people will show up, and it'll be an interesting conversation, and that's where you're going to get most of the value of this conference. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your questions.